Today, let's talk about how to edit your photos. I'll provide a demo how to edit your photos with or without presets, so you can decide which one suits you better. Stay tuned. Now I'm gonna demo how I retouch this image from this to this using two different methods. First, I'm going to demo how I retouch it manually. Make sure you watch until the end of the video. And I'm going to show you how I retouch it with my presets. Okay, click on Reset. So everything goes back to 0. There are 3 major adjustments I'll make no matter I retouch a photo with or without presets. Number 1, correct the composition flaws. For example, this image, the horizon is not straight. Click on R on your keyboard or click on this rectangle. Click on the angle ruler. Draw a line across the horizon to fix the problem of the composition. Number 2, I will see if the photo is correctly exposed. I have a very detailed video about how to use histogram to judge whether your photo is correctly exposed. This image is okay. Alright, number 3 basic adjustment is the white balance. From a first glance, the skin tone looks okay to me, although to precisely adjust the white balance, I could line up the blue and yellow pixels in the histogram to maximize the gray area to adjust the white balance. Similarly, for the tint, try to use the slider to line up the green and magenta in the histogram. This is probably the most scientific way to adjust white balance. Obviously, you can use the eyedrop tool or use one of the selections, which I'm going to explain in a separate video tutorial in the future. After these 3 basic adjustments, I would take a very quick look to see the contrast of the image. Obviously, this photo is taken on a cloudy day. However, the sky looks a little bit on the bright side, whereas the major subject is on the dark side because wearing the darker clothes. What I can do is bring down the highlights and then bring up the shadow. Leave the white and black as is, just to make the image look a little bit more flat. Now the photo looks a little bit too bright to me, so let me just bring down the exposure a little bit more. In terms of the texture, clarity, and dehaze for this photo, I'm okay with the way it is. I will typically bring down the variance and saturation, especially the saturation, somewhere between -10 to 20. I personally prefer a little bit muted tones. Now in the next step, tone curve, starting with the RGB. If you have heard of S-curve, I'm not surprised, but I just wanted to remind you that not all the photos requires S-curve, especially if your photo has very, very high contrast already. You absolutely do not need S-curve like this to further increase the contrast. For an image like this, which is already contrasted with its tones, I actually don't prefer to have a S-curve, but I do want to protect the white. Now, in terms of red, green, blue channel, I typically will change the blue channel first. This will very quickly dictate whether my image will look cool or warm. I prefer the sky to look a little bit cool, so I bring the blue channel up. And now let me go back to the red. I usually prefer red in the shadow. Although this image you probably wouldn't see that much difference because I don't have a huge shadow area in this image. You probably will see some kind of change in the clothes. I typically don't change the green unless it is a sunset, sunrise landscape photo. If I want my image to look more magenta, especially for the sunset clouds, I would do that. But for travel photos like this, I wouldn't do it. The next step, I would prefer my image to look darker in the sky. Let me click on this luminance indicator. Clicking on, you probably wouldn't see it, but there is a little bit blue tint in the sky. Just by sliding down on the blue part that I selected, you can actually see now the sky has some texture. It doesn't look that boring anymore. And then I would prefer the sand to look little red. Just click on this little indicator, click on the sand and bring it down, but just be very, very careful. For any of my image, I will be very careful to change any red, orange, or yellow because they will mess up the skin tone. All right, and then usually I'll bring down the saturation of the green and blues in the image. It's just my personal preference. I prefer muted tone in my photo. So now the next step, I usually will skip split toning. I only use split toning in my landscape photos, but not travel photos. The next step is in the lens correction. If enable profile correction is not selected, I'll make sure that it is selected. Remove chromatic aberration is not necessary for all the photos since it doesn't hurt. I'll just select both. This will make sure that any unnecessary lens distortion will be corrected automatically by Lightroom, especially if you take this photo with a wide angle lens. The next thing is to add vignetting. I mentioned probably many times before, I love vignetting. It's something quick and easy. You can darken the edge of the photo in order to draw audience attention to your main subject. Now this photo goes from this to this. Now let me make some local adjustment with graduated filter. Let me pull down this graduated filter from the sky. You can hover over on this dot or click on O on your keyboard to see where this effect is taking place. I wanted to darken the sky a little bit, so make sure you click on exposure and bring down the exposure. However, this will also darken the main subject's face. To protect the main subject's face, you go to the range mask, click on luminance or color. Select the pixels with the luminance or color you want to darken. Click done. Now the sky looks further darkened, whereas the main subject looks still okay. Now I actually want this main subject's face to look even brighter. What I can do is to use a radial filter. Same thing, when you hover over on the black dot or click on the O on your keyboard, you can see where this effect is taking place. When you click on the exposure, this time you want to increase the exposure to brighten up the part of the image that was covered by the radial filter. All right, it looks pretty cool to me. Now the image looks a little bit on the flat side. I can either increase the contrast or go back to the RGB and bring down the shadow a little bit. All right, perhaps the vignetting effect is too strong, so let me change that slightly. All right, let me just show you the before and after. This is the before and this is the after. You can see that was quite a sharp contrast. What I can actually do furthermore, if you think that the background is unnecessary for this photo, you can remove the background by selecting the spot removal tool and select the right size of the brush. Select the feather somewhere between 50 to 100, opacity 100, and I can remove the background and select clone or heal. In this example, heal might be a better. Basically, I wanted to copy this part of the image to this part. Now, let me further reduce. Just line up the horizon, okay? And here. All right. Now let's make a virtual copy of this image. I wanted to show you how I retouch this image using my preset. Make sure you reset. Did I mention that I have 3 major adjustments? First, line up the horizon to correct the composition. Second, adjust the exposure, which I feel is okay. Third, line up the white balance. All right, and then let me select one of my preset to see which one I like the best. Since we manually retouched it with a cool tone, let me choose one of the cool tone preset, like this. Since I darkened the sky, let me just do something similar. by darkening the sky and click on the range mask to make sure only the sky is darkened. And then I wanted to add a vignetting to the image, and that's pretty much done to my taste. And because we have removed the background, let me just do one more time. Okay, the spot removal tool is not perfect for this image. Did I use the radial tool? These are not necessary. You absolutely do not need to use so many tools for all the pictures. For demo purposes, I'm trying to use what I think is the most useful tools in Adobe Lightroom for you to bring a dull image to life. Now, this is the manually retouched image, and this is retouching using the preset. I can actually show you some of the comparison from different presets. All right, you can see that using the preset is definitely a much quicker way to retouch an image. But if you have time, manually retouching the image allows you full control to edit the image according to your taste. All right, I hope this video tutorial is helpful to you. If you like it, please like, comment, or share, and come back to my future episode.